Well, a 17-year-old high school senior when I went to the 3 nights to the Trips Festival, and it certainly left an impression on me that lasted so that I started gathering stories about it, including Bill Graham in 1985, Kesey before he died, and I put together this documentary. But, you know, it's interesting because the case was made that a lot of people were doing their thing independently, but this event was the first time people said, wow, there are this many of us.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of events before. Bill Graham did the appeals for the mime troupe, which were benefits, and there were a couple of shows at the Longshoremen's Hall that the Family Dog put on. But this was the event, literally, Bill Graham took out the dance hall permit for the Fillmore the very next day, the Monday, because he saw how the light shows and the Dead played together. And it's also, in a sense, the passing of the torch from the beatnik to the hippie, because there was some beatnik style of art going on, poetry readings, the open theater, which performed, but people were really digging the Dead. And I know Big Brother played there before.
Ken Babbs, who ran the he was kind of the beatnik thing, you know, leftover kind of.
So as Ferlinghetti aptly put it, the beatniks were caveman hippies. And the predecessor of that.
I think as it shakes out, the beatniks really had a really strong sense of they had an ethos about them. You know, they might have personally behaved pretty wildly, but I think they were a lot clearer about what it meant to be a beatnik, you know, and they stayed true to it in a certain way. Like everybody that ever influenced anybody that I know were basically beatniks, and they had all these amazing high ideas that, for the most part, the hippies weren't that clear about it. You know, they really didn't have this really great sense of Eastern religion and the LSD experience. And
well, they were older and they were more committed to that.
And that's a key point that I think Gary Snyder was the first environmental poet
Gary was the biggest influence on the Sons.
Yeah.
And it's that our manager did shows with him called Mongolographies all during that period. And I mean, we literally read Gary Snyder as prerequisite to taking LSD, just for a different vision of the world.
I kind of view three threads. There was the beatnik movement and certainly the left-wing political civil rights movement. There was the surf culture, which was emerging, where a lot of young people were growing their hair long and smoking pot. And the folk culture, which a lot of the bands came out of, that all kind of merged into the hippie thing. So those were the kind of precursors going on in the early 60s that led to, I mean, it's not accidental that an artist who I think is going to be the enduring artist of the psychedelic era, Rick Griffin, started out doing Murph the Surf cartoons. Part of the surf culture. Mouse was a airbrush painter who painted you know, the car culture and all that. So it's very interesting what happened in California, because a lot of these influences merged into what became the psychedelic culture.
You know, those surf guys, they all turned into the Brotherhood of Eternal Light.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
those are really good friends of mine. You know, and Jim Otto was the mayor of Laguna Beach, and
they were in Hawaii at the same time.
Yeah, eventually that's how all the good Hawaiian, you know, ended up happening.
Well, it's funny we're sitting.
They smuggled all that amazing Afghani, and I mean, that was.
It's funny we're sitting here at the Trident, because I remember one of the first images I had of walking in the Trident. When you came in, there was a picture on the wall of a couple of long-haired guys peeking their heads through these tall marijuana plants, and it turned out to be Tom Law and Reno Meyerson. And Tom Law was the brother of John Philip Law, the actor who was Duran Duran in Barbarella and owned the castle where the Mamas and Papas lived in L.A. And his wife, Lisa Law, documented that era beautifully and shot a lot of wonderful pictures of Big Brother.
Took the iconic photograph of Big Brother and the holding company in front of the flag.
And that was her shot of Reno and Tom that graced the entrance to the Trident as you walked in. So that immediately gave you a clue that you were entering an alternative universe. And Roger Summers, who built this beautiful woodwork here, lived up in Muir Woods, where Margot St. James lived and Alan Watts hung out, and they had these wonderful Sunday bongo
You know,
soirees
Eric,
in the
maybe
60s.
you know this, but downstairs it says David Richards painted the ceiling of the Trident. We knew him. He was our equipment manager, you know, and he did a lot of beautiful painting. But that just doesn't look like his style. Do you think he painted that ceiling?
You know, I don't know that
of the
story. I know
Trident?
Roger Summers is the carpenter architect
Right,
who
yeah.
famously did all the beautiful woodwork
Yeah,
here.
lovely.
And you know, the Trident's interesting
There's
in
the
that
rainbow back.
yeah. The Trident was sort of, you know, where the Playboy Club had these beautiful women, this was our version of it,
Yeah.
with the waitresses
Well
wearing
put.
see-through blouses.
Well
And I remember, you know, back in my early days in underground radio, because I was lucky enough to be mentored by Tom Donahue,
The girls with the earrings.
Yeah.
the promo men would
Let's
take
take
us
a
here.
moment and recollect the Trident waitress.
All right.
Well, the best, remember, like, you know, that's one of the things, because we would come down here and we'd meet Frank and we'd eat, you know. And I remember talking to Randy Sterling, who was our producer, and I was going, God, these are the most unbelievable, beautiful women. And he says, well, any of them that have this little earring, Frank's made love to them. And then basically he's given them that earring. And then you checked out the girls, just the finest, most unbelievable women were all wearing these little earrings.
Well,
you know.
somewhere there exists a book. Frank would have auditions on Monday for
God.
potential waitresses, and somewhere there exists this book of these incredible women. But one woman that worked here is really interesting. What happened to a number of women? First of all, Crosby had a boat called the Mayan.
I remember that.
George Walker, who was Electric George, part of the pranksters, drove the bus and supplied a lot of the goodies for the pranksters. He had the Flying Cloud. Arab was part owner of the Astor, which was the Lipton T-boat. These beautiful wooden ships. And occasionally one would pull up and someone would shout out, anyone want to go to Hawaii? And one of the waitresses would literally jump off the deck onto the boat and float away to Hawaii. And who knows what happened to a lot of them.
Yeah.
But this was a literal pickup joint in that way.
Do you think those ships actually made it there? They did, by and large, right?
Well,
Because I want to go on one.
there was a fantasy to do a movie on the hippie armada with all those characters.
Yeah.
And,
There was layers of stuff going on here, because I know a couple of women here that used to turn tricks here. You know, and they were just equally...
Big surprise.
Yeah, you know, equally gorgeous, just the nicest women. And, you know, there was like a whole group of them that would just, you know, rotate around. And now they're just really quite successful businesswomen in San Anselmo and...
Following Sally Stanford's.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Sausalito, yeah.
Time-honored tradition.
one of the waitresses, Nancy, this is a funny story. I was sitting with Bill Graham here, and Nancy, the waitress, walked by, and I'd known her as a waitress. And Bill gives her this really big hug and warm embrace. And after she leaves, I said, how do you know Nancy? Her father owned the Concord Club in the Catskills where Bill worked. He worked at Grossinger's and Concord, and her father owned that club. And that really spoke volumes about, as Joel can testify, how Bill put on his shows. He was a waiter in the Catskills, and he really treated the audience in that manner. I remember The Last Waltz feeding thousands of people during this great concert.
It's when you went and played for him, and he did this for us a number of times, you'd fight to get any kind of money that you thought you deserved. And he would be right there watching you play. And at the end of the night, if you really tore it up, he'd come and he says, I'm paying you twice as much.
Wow.
He says, that was just too good.
Yeah.
So, you know, he was actually
But
really...
and you never stopped to wonder how much he was making.
Well, that never... that was...
It's typical dumb hippie.
Well, you know what?
The Stones figured it out when he opened up that gate at Candlestick.
Hey, Joe, standing next to Bill Graham, it was pretty clear that I wasn't in any category that Bill Graham was. Like, you know.
I don't get too sentimental about Bill. You know, here's a guy who thought it was great sport to steal anything he could from anyone, and he felt totally at ease with that kind of ethic.
He was like Joe Kennedy or something like that. You
He's
know,
just a
it's-
pig. I know, though, a pig's a pig.
I always hear both sides of that, though. Sometimes I hear
Well,
that, and then
look.
I hear how fabulous he was. And
I
that
know
he
I
was
have
moving
I have
around.
a lot of respect for the guy, because, you know, he basically just pulled the trigger right away. You never had any question about where you were with him. and he could be amazingly rude.
Yeah.
But then, right, you know, on the other side,
My
he-
first wife had it down perfectly. She says, I get Bill Graham. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is negotiable.
well,
That's the guy.
But
That's the man.
Joel,
That's just that era and how
dig it,
people do
man.
business.
No,
I'll
man,
add
Jones didn't
one
do
thing
business
to that.
way.
Bill did come through many times for the community with benefits, and my experience,
Oh,
early experience.
stop,
No, but he
please.
did. He did.
No, let me tell you about this right
Okay,
now. No,
okay, good.
stop
We'll have
right
a good
now.
argument.
The AIDS benefit in the Oakland Stadium in 1988 didn't sell out. As a result, the net to the cause was $42,000. Bill's expenses that day, Bill's expenses were $1 million. Oh, police.
Well, that's
Well,
pretty
I'll give
common
you- I'll
though,
give-
with
Who did that
charity
concert
events. That's pretty
benefit?
common.
Okay, in the early days, I'll give you this example. I was a student at UC Berkeley when People's Park went on, and they needed money for the bail benefit. I had, through Tom Donahue, had known Bill. I called him, he said, Eric, you get the groups, you got Winterland. So I called up Bill Thompson, I called up Rock Scully, we got the Dead Airplane. Turned out to be Dead Airplane, Creedence, Elvin Bishop. The biggest show at Winterland until the last waltz.
Did he give you a
What-
cut-
what
and
year
Bill,
is
did
that?
he give you a cut of the bar?
What year is that?
Did he share the parking with you?
That was 1969.
Yeah, no, Bill made out like a fox.
He
that
doesn't
night.
like Bill Graham and he
always
doesn't
took
like
care of
Janis
himself
Joplin.
first.
Those are the two.
Well, Carlos Santana.
Don't get him
Let's
started.
Add Carlos. Let's add
Don't
Carlos
get
to your
him
fan
started.
club list.
When Janice lived there in Larkspur, I went over to say hi to her, you know, and stuff. And I remember her walking out, just kind of almost totally naked and just getting that Southern comfort out and taking.
She was a class
Exhausted.
act, right, Terry?
Yeah.
Well, there,
Actually, I didn't know her that well, but she's.
Janice used to come in
pretty good,
here,
yeah.
She loved
and
you.
one night when I was here, this really attractive young man, Joel Cornolia, who lived up at David Crosby's house as kind of the gatekeeper, was sitting there, and Janice did one of these, "Come this way, young man," and they went off that night, and he ended up going on that Festival Express train
yeah,
across
yeah,
Canada
right,
with you
yeah, yeah.
guys. But,
But
Red-haired
you
Joel.
were making a point about Bill earlier, though.
Well,
you were
know,
putting on a
I-
show
I,
with
I
him,
understand Joel's relationship with him, and he did the same thing with me as a journalist. I mean, you know, one time a kid fell off the Oakland Coliseum thing, and Channel 7 reported it. And the next Monday, the phone was blazing to me. Well, how could you report that without talking to me? Bill, I wasn't there. I
Yeah.
didn't work weekends, but to me, you are Channel 7
Yeah.
because I was the link between Channel 7 and Bill Graham. So yeah, I had the wrath of. I mean, it was called the Wolf Gang. If you had the wrath of Bill, and everybody did. I just wanted to balance a little of it, and Joel may know more of the forensic analysis of the benefits, but he did keep the Haight-Ashbury Clinic open for a lot of years. The lighting of the menorah, whether you're a lapsed Jew or not, is a significant event in San Francisco, and the Bill Graham Foundation still supports the lighting of the menorah.
But-
I'm unimpressed with Bill's generosity.
So what
It
was the point
largely
about
a
the
cover
show,
for
though?
his
You were talking about the
mendacity.
show at the.
Well,
he gave you the
yeah,
Winterland.
Bill basically said, I mean, Bill didn't want to ask the acts, but if you got the acts together, he would
Yeah.
put on the benefit if he believed in the
Yeah.
cause.
He'd do that
I
all
think
throughout
he
his
had
career
the
because he
full-on
can still make the
DNA
money.
psychedelic experience. I think he got as
Yeah.
high as anybody
Yeah,
ever got.
yeah. Well, there you go.
I think that he needs to be really defended a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
I think that inside that guy was just an amazingly deep spiritual psychedelic vision. But
No, he was driven by the Holocaust. He's
Yeah.
a survivor. And so was Werber. That was very interesting. Both Werber and Bill were infants in Europe when this all happened. And to just amplify a little, I know earlier you were talking about Werber. He started out as a publicist, and he saw the Kingston Trio at a place called the Italian Villa in North Beach. And that's when their break didn't come at the Hungry Eye. Phyllis Diller canceled at the Purple Onion, and he got
Right,
the
that's
Kingston
right.
Trio
I
in
played
there.
the Hungry Eye long
Yeah.
enough to record that album.
But Werber also
Yeah.
was associated with another San Francisco legend, Enrico Banducci, because he'd worked at the Hungry Eye a bit for him before he
the
managed to
other
get his trio.
thing to know about Frank, like, just like Bill Graham was so powerful when you'd stand in front of him, and if he wanted to make your solar plexus shake like that, he could just do that. But Frank could do that too. I mean, they really just like formative
Well-
alpha guys. You know?
One thing Joel
So
said
you
earlier.
didn't get along with him too well? With Bill?
Bill and me were like this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty famous.
You were at 2 with each other.
One thing Joel said earlier that I,
Joel and Bill and Carlos Santana in the room.
Yeah,
It's
don't,
gonna be like
Bill
shreds.
Graham and Janis Joplin.
no, but
like
Joel, one thing you
irrational.
did say earlier that I endorse totally, and that is what a visionary and underappreciated guy Tom Donahue was.
Yeah, Tom
Yeah,
Donahue
yeah.
was
Because Tom,
genius compared to
look,
Bill,
Tom
you know?
put
Yeah,
on the
well,
shows at the
yeah.
Cow Palace that I was
Yeah.
fortunate enough. I started mailing out records for Tom as a kid because I was a
Yeah.
45 junkie. I have 15,000 45s, which Joel has seen some of. But
Coming just to hear you talk.
well, no. Tom,
He's a
Tom
historian.
was such a dominant
Bill
figure, and I always thought, well, I'm a little kid, and that's why he's so dominant. But then I realized he was that way to
Yeah.
everybody. You didn't have to be a little kid. But Tom had the record company. He had a programming service where 50 copies or 100 copies of the records would come into Tempo Productions, and he would do a chart sheet and mail them out to all these outlying radio stations that didn't have the promo men visit them. So he influenced a lot of what became hits and what didn't become hits around. And he went from, as Joel said, the era in Philadelphia. He was very close with Phil Spector because he played Phil's records when Phil was a teenager as a producer. Matter of fact, disc jockeys were so powerful then. There's probably only Joel will know this. There was a record called Midnight Stroll by the Rebels. And Tom had a co-writing credit on it. He had nothing to do with writing that record, but that was,
Co-writer of Come On and Swim, too.
yeah, but that was,
Coleman.
yeah, Coleman. Tom Coleman was his name, right? But he spotted Sylvester
Yeah.
Stewart.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting story. When I worked for Tom, the Warlocks came and they
Yeah.
auditioned for him.
Yeah.
And his line after they auditioned was, "Not commercial enough."
Yeah.
And he was right.
Yeah,
You know-
still,
you know-
he's still right.
Do you know how American said after he auditioned Santana? Can't play, won't sell.
But
Wait, the guy who turned down the Beatles, right?
Yeah,
but Sly was so amazing.
I think at that point in Carlos's career, because he played so much blues and he hadn't really become Carlos.
You buying it? Ahmet was right.
Well, I
I
am,
heard
you
him.
know,
I heard
you know
him
why?
very
Because,
early. He was great, Carlos.
Carlos was always great, but
Yeah.
Carlos used to come, him and Neil used to come and bring their guitars when the Sons would play, and I
Yeah.
gave them guitar lessons.
Oh, Neil's later.
And, I'm half
So
Cuban,
that's
No,
why
but I'm
he
half-
gave him guitar
but I'm
lessons.
half Cuban, so I really couldn't listen to Carlos, and I remember sitting there going,
Yeah.
you know what? The brown blood stuff where
Cubans don't like Mexican music
Yeah,
at all.
well, it's this really.
It's
weird one,
martial.
isn't it?
Really?
Mexican music is like.
But you know what?
oompa,
I
oompa.
could hear the big difference in him. And see,
Yeah.
we
If
were
we're gonna
playing
t- if
guitar
we're-
and talking about what was good. I was going, I think you should just play that other stuff. I think that would be a lot better.
If we're gonna talk
Yeah.
about early Santana, let's mention Chapito.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, well he was.
Chapito was the really magnificent, evolved
Well,
musician
Michael
of that era.
Carabello was pretty cool too.
Well,
Yeah,
don't
I mean,
forget,
they-
Bill Graham loved Tito Puente and
Yeah.
loved salsa music
Yeah.
from his days in New York and his days
Right.
at those clubs. So he really helped embrace Carlos early on and gave him a big break.
gave him
Now,
the ways.
I know, and maybe this is a question to you, Joel, but like myself, who collects records from the 50s and even earlier, you know the roots of a lot of the people that became popular in the 60s and 70s. And maybe that's part of it, is that Carlos copped a lot of stuff.
Carlos
from-
was a Mike Bloomfield disciple, no
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
about
No
that.
doubt about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
Yeah.
We would make pilgrimages. As a matter of fact, Carlos and I at one point, we were taking turns going over to Michael's place in Mill Valley because he was just, so strung out. And he was such a nervous guy anyway, and so we would go over there just trying to make sure he was okay. Go over there with Buddy Miles, and Buddy was such a big guy. Buddy would just roust around and see if he could find any drugs to get rid of him and stuff, but.
Michael was very interesting. I was sitting at the Cafe Med on Telegraph in the 60s with him, and he reaches over and pulls up the salt shaker and turns it over, and there's a bee on the bottom of the
Yeah.
salt shaker, which, if you look, there's a lot. His father owned
Yeah.
the company that did all the restaurant supply, invented the squeeze ketchup bottle and all. So Michael came from a lot of money and slummed into Chicago
Yeah.
scene. So he was very interesting to me that way.
I remember
Yeah.
Michael telling
Yeah.
me that in high school that he was down around the cripples in status, only he was sound of body.
Yeah, he was funny that way.
He's one of the sweetest, just innocent guys. He's like a big kid.
Other thing about
He
Carlos,
introduced me to George Benson in probably 72 or 73, because we were both in Chicago, and he said, you know, I know this guitar player that plays, just sounds just like you. You got to come and hear him. So we went to hear him, and I'm going, you know, Michael, what in the world are you talking about? You know, George Benson is amazing, but you know, Michael knew everybody.
Yeah.
He knew everybody.
He
and Johnny
George
Carson
Benson
were
was
pals.
All right.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, one of Michael's subjects was the history of American comedy, and he was an expert in it. And Carson used to have him go run around in golf carts and, you know, talk old-time comedy with Michael.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was an amazing guy. One thing about Carlos that I would make note of in front of you, because I think you'd have an excellent reflection on it. I think the most interesting thing about Carlos's playing is that it doesn't go on very long before you're aware that the person playing it is of Spanish heritage.
Yeah, well, that would be a good association to make.
But it's a part of his playing. For some reason, he's able to sound Latino.
Well, his
Well,
father
I
was a
think that's-
mariachi.
he is.
His father's a mariachi.
Yeah.
His
But
father
I mean,
used to
like,
play
you
at
know,
the
that-
cantina.
That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
you
no,
know,
the guys-
the guitar doesn't have a race.
Yeah, but the guy is very gifted. Well, you know, it's like that. If you picked up a guitar, you'd sound like Joel. Yeah?
Joel, his
Wow, what would that sound like?
Carlos was estranged from his father, but his father used to play at the cantina in Mill Valley.
Yeah.
He's a mariachi, and he played violin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And,
knew Jose.
yeah,
He was
yeah,
around Mission
yeah,
District
yeah,
a lot.
yeah.
The thing about Carlos was that he was living in 2-room apartment with 9 people, sisters, brother, parents, and everybody was expected to contribute, and Carlos had to literally run away from home and leave his family and not tell them where he was in order to join this band and play the rock music with the guys from Mission High that he'd met.
He was so absolutely sweet and enthusiastic when he was young. I mean,
Well, he spoke very little English.
Yeah,
I went to
was gonna
James
say, he
Lick.
couldn't speak English.
No, I
but
went to
he
James
can.
Lick Junior High, and at the same year he did. And he came back for a reunion, and we talked about it, and he said, I didn't know anybody because I didn't speak much English.
Well,
But
he
went to James and then
learned.
to Mission.
He
Is that-
learned how to
Is that
speak.
why Graham liked him so much because of the Tito Puentes thing?
Oh, yeah, no,
Yeah.
Graham loved
Yeah.
Latin music. That was his
Carlos
favorite.
did not know about Latin music.
My mom took me
Carlos
to
knew
see
about
Tito
R&B
Puente when I
from
was
being
young.
in.
It was a
Because
blues
she knew
band.
Armando
It was a
Brazza.
Santana
Oh,
blues
Michael
band.
Michael
Yeah.
Carabella's auntie.
What
who
did she
had
do? Where was she
and
from?
I'm trying to think of
Well,
the
she
guy's
came
name.
away,
Yeah.
Spanish
Camagüey
Grease,
province
Willie
in,
Bobo. And
a
that
little
was
town
the
called
record that
Holguín.
like went
Yeah.
they
Did you
go,
learn
"Oh,
Spanish from her or
wow."
anything? Yeah, yeah.
Latin
Wow.
Ringo.
But I'm going to Chile.
Because that
My
Santana
daughter's
sound,
there
that was
teaching,
sort of
so
a
we're
hybrid
going pretty quick.
between,
Well,
it was
but,
Latin.
It was something that
Yeah,
those
she
guys cooked
worked,
up without
yeah.
knowing much about it.
But there was a little
Desi
Gabor
Arnaz for a
Szabo. There was a
while.
little
That was Stan,
Peter-
that was
Peter-
Stan- that was
Peter
Stan-
Green.
Stan
And
Markham,
she was
Yeah,
really good
yeah.
who
friends
was
with
the
the
manager,
Melendez.
and he
And
was a
so
little bit more
my aunt,
sophisticated, and
who
he
was the youngest
feeding them
in our
Coltrane
family, you know, when
records
they
and God
go
knows
across the
Szabo
tightrope with the
records, but-
7 people.
Yeah, yeah.
My aunt was the little girl in the very
Latin
top
Ringo
of
was
the
a
deal.
What
So
about-
she'd
what
work
about
with the
Graham again?
Melendez in the circus for
Did
a
Graham
number
have
of years.
pets? I
Then
mean,
she
were there
came
people that
here
you
to
liked better
this
than other
country,
people? Who
dancing
did he
and
like?
singing.
Who's
And she worked
Well, he had
with
a
Danny
famous
Kaye
relationship with the
and
dad
Jimmy Durante
that,
and,
for New
you know,
Year's
a bunch
Eve,
of
and
different people.
they could.
That's how she met my
I
dad.
mean, there's
My
myriads
dad,
of
I think,
stories
was working
about
with
that.
Sinatra at the
And then the
time,
groups
and
that he
they met at
managed,
the,
you
they
know.
didn't particularly like
like
him.
the Ed Sullivan show. And she's still got pictures of all that, where she's there with Ed Sullivan
I think they
and
talked
Louis
about him in the St.
Armstrong.
Joseph.
Let's keep one conversation.
That's great. Yeah. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Your relationship with Bill Graham was what, in Janice and Big Brother?
Yeah,
We're all good with
Bill
you?
Graham took off on me a few times. You know, I was late for one gig in New York, and he was beside himself. And I said, "You don't have to pay me tonight, Bill." And he just softened immediately. You know, when
Aw,
you
you
know,
gotta talk
that's
to
like,
Bill.
"Oh my God, that's my language. You're speaking my language
Did
now."
you ever get barred from going to concerts?
You can never. Longshoreman's Hall, the first one. I tried to bring my drummer in, and he was crippled. It's an old word, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a new word now, you know, ambulatorially challenged or something. But you know, and so I was really. Bill said, "You can come in, but he can't," you know. And I went to Bill and I went, "You're a motherfucker," and he exploded. You
could
know,
never.
That's quite bossy to even do that.
I call that
Yeah.
Club 87.
Well, I didn't know him. If I would have known him, you know.
The real apocryphal story on why the Fillmore succeeded and the Avalon didn't, you'd see a line around the block at the Avalon. That would be the guest list line. And
Yeah.
there'd be 3 people buying a ticket. For Graham, the line around the block would be for buying tickets, and there'd be
Yeah.
nobody on the guest list line.
That's good.
The famous Bloomfield story is here. It's Mike Bloomfield on the marquee, and Mike's backstage, and Bill comes around and he says, "Michael, your mother's here. What should I tell her?" He says, "Tell her I'm not here." Because you wanted to get in.
Oh God.
Yeah.
No, you know, the reason that it didn't work is because, you know, Chet was the most egalitarian, incredibly wonderful human, and he wasn't doing any of that for the same reason that Bill Graham
Yeah,
was.
you're right.
It was, you know,
Totally different.
for him, that's the place you wanted to be. That's the place you wanted. If you were going to take LSD and play, that's the place you wanted
Yeah.
to be. And it was just an experiment for Chet. You know, I mean, till the day Chet died, he was just one of the sweetest friends.
Yeah.
Well, here was Bill's
Yeah,
polite
he saw
answer.
the whole thing.
When I asked Bill, and I knew him well enough, this was in '85 when I interviewed him and used some of this in the Trips Festival. I asked him, "Bill, how do you react when people call you a capitalist pig and a ripoff and all that?" And he said, "Well, you know, there was a aversion to the organizational." And really, Bill at the Trips Festival was the square guy with the clipboard running around trying to make
Yeah.
sense out of chaos.
Yeah.
And, you know, in a way, that's what Bill did. He saw the scene, and he saw that, you know, Chet was certainly a hippie and certainly as stoned as everybody else, but
Yeah.
Bill was always, you
I
know,
think
punctual, on
before
time,
that
organizational
scene, I was
guy.
just telling you about they'd let in like 50 people by a side door or something at that Trips Festival.
Yeah.
You know, and he was really upset about that. So when I showed up with one guy and said, "Can he come in?" And, you know, that just,
I think it's really a good point to make, though, about Bill Graham, that, you know, in my mind, he was every bit as high as Chet. They, you know, they were just different people with different lives. But
Joel's
I just,
not
I
buying it.
really, no, I just really think that Bill Graham basically had one of the deepest LSD experiences. And one of the reasons I say that is he only had 2 secretaries in his whole life, Annie Hatch and Rita. And Annie Hatch was our secretary after she worked for him, and Rita was his secretary after she worked for us for years. So we always had this really nice connection with just kind of the politics and the whole way that it shook out. And they had so much respect for Bill. You know.
Oh, please.
I'm telling you.
I'm just going to lard Bill's asshole here.
We have about 20 minutes of record time.
Good, because we'll just keep this going one
This is
minute.
good.
Let's talk for a
wait,
minute.
wait,
We're so worked up. I
what
love
is it, Jesse?
But what I'd like to shift it to a little bit is to maybe we could talk about Ralph.
Just
Ron
just
Kobe,
a
West
just a
Coast.
minute, Jesse.
Yeah.
Oh, let's talk
Yeah,
about
he
Bill
will.
Graham.
He just want,
I'm
he,
gonna
he,
take direction
he
right
will. Wait.
In a minute, Jesse. Bill Graham.
He wants stuff for the Ace of Cups
Wait a
documentary.
second. Bill
Right.
Graham and Chet
And
Helm
I do
started
too.
out as partners, right?
Right.
They were partners at the film.
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
first film.
Oh,
so
yeah. Bill totally.
tells this
He
story
screwed him,
all
yeah.
his life. He told this story the last time I spoke with him. I've heard him tell this story a dozen
tells it
times.
proudly.
Everybody that sits around at the end of the weekend and they're going, "Oh, this is great. What are we going to go do next weekend?" And everybody says, "Oh, we got to get the Paul Butterfield band." And Chet says, "Bill, we got to get the Paul Butterfield
true.
band." And Bill says, "We got to get the Paul Butterfield band." And then Bill tells the story. He says, "So you know what I did? I got up that Monday at
Yeah.
6 in the morning because I knew it was 9 in the morning in New York, and I
Chicago,
booked that band."
With Albert Grossman. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
you know, this is
Oh,
Bill
yeah.
saying, "See, I had all this moxie, I had all this get
Yeah,
up and go,
that's true.
and the hippie was still
True.
asleep in bed." That was what Bill's idea of that
Bill
story
tells that
was.
proudly.
Yeah, well, to me, that's the story of somebody fucking his partner. And I don't think it's funny at all.
Well,
But I
it's-
don't
yeah.
hear the conflict in it. I just hear the experiment in it. It's like, you know, Joe,
Terry, you and I are sitting around, we're counting money. You know, hey, Terry, that was really a good sale. Now, what are we doing next week, you know? We're gonna sell this thing.
Joe, you know
I
how
get up
often-
and you've sold it.
I understand all that. I understand. Joel, in my own personal experiences, I've had the same kind of relationship and the same dynamics. But you know what? Life is short. You
Yeah.
stay true to the things
Yeah.
that you stay true to.
There you go.
And you realize that even though
Yeah.
the person in front of you sees it exactly the opposite,
Yeah.
the thing that bonds you is they're staying true to their thing. And in the end run, you get old and you die, and it happens so quickly. There's only
Yeah, yeah.
there's a common ground in it if you could know yourself well.
He
enough
lives
to
that.
get
He lives
stuck
this.
in
He's
the
not
middle.
just
No,
saying
that's
it.
true.
He
This
lives
is Jerry
it.
walks
He
the
lives
walk.
it.
Let me give a little,
Yeah.
meaty history
I know
with
you
Bill.
do.
But this
Jesse needs to
segues into Ralph.
Let me start. Like
Joel follows in a very interesting lineage of the Chronicle, and it goes back to John Wasserman before him, who John had a very interesting relationship with Bill, and Ralph J. Gleason, who really directed Bill to the
Yeah.
Fillmore. So the Chronicle has always been a very important
Yeah.
function, whether you're taking full page ads in the pink section or doing something. So to Joel's credit, while a lot of the media was kissing Bill's ass and doing whatever Bill wanted and take it, Joel stood up to him in a lot of ways, and that's admirable. But Herb Cain also stood up to him and printed some stuff about Bill that he didn't like. So Bill had a huge problem with a couple people at the Chronicle
Yeah.
for a long time.
Bill had a problem with the free press.
Yeah.
I kept
Yeah.
trying to explain to him who Al Davis
function.
was. He didn't understand, Oh, no, man, Bill, you're the team owner. They don't care about you. They care about the people who play the game.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
forget what hippie at that meeting,
But he
at the Ocean Beach meeting where they said, Bill, you can have our love or respect, but can't have both.
Yeah.
Or you can have our love or money, but you can't
Yeah.
have both.
Yeah.
And you've already made the choice. Chet didn't want our money, he wanted our love.
Yeah.
Bill didn't want our love. Well, yes, he did. He wanted that too.
And he's got that too.
I think
He's
Chet,
got it.
I think Chet just wanted to plant a little different seed and see what happened with it. I don't think there
But
was much
did you
more.
guys understand that Bill Graham was doing you a service when he started putting those shows together and
Yeah.
things started working out?
Are you kidding? Any
Yeah.
place that you can play where a
Right.
bunch of
Yeah.
people show up, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And they were making money too, Larry. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what, Ron Pulte says, man, we'd come into town, we'd make $1,000 in a weekend, it'd be all cash, we'd
Yeah.
take home girls and dope, and we didn't think how much he was making.
Yeah.
And don't forget the early ticket prices were $2.50, $3.
Yeah.
We're not talking a ton of money.
Yeah.
We were clear that we weren't taking the responsibility for it. We were getting paid. We were employees. We may have been had a fan base and in our little world been something, but relative to, if you don't have a place to play, guess what? You're nothing.
Yeah.
It was great.
Larry, Buona Bill. Buona Bill, the imperialist. He let them have
Well,
some bamboo for
now-
No. I have just.
He let the field hands into the house.
Jesse wants to ask some questions about the Ace of Cups. I think,
Yeah.
but
Get the bite in for
Well, yeah, I'm working on this film in the Ace of Cups, so can we talk about them in context with the other bands?
Yeah, no, let's talk about the Ace of Cups. we were managed
I'll bow down to them.
by West Pole. And West Pole was one of the sweetest little groups. It didn't go very far. The managers really didn't have what it took. But it was the nicest group of people. It was Fred Roth managed the Sons, Ron Pulte managed the Quicksilver, Julius Carfin managed the Big Brother, and George Smith managed the Ace of Cups.
Yeah.
And philosophically, all these guys were so tied together. Half of them or 2/3 of them had come from Chicago and were numbers runners.
yeah.
And done time for anything from murder to
Burglary.
to whatever. And then they came here and they took LSD.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're managers of all these far out
Yeah.
bands, I mean, it was really quite excellent,
And the Ace of Cups were the girl band, pardon the expression, of the whole psychedelic thing. I mean, was there another one?
No, there wasn't.
They were there.
I-
They were pioneers. And
I remember we went to San Quentin and we played at San Quentin. It was the Sons and the Ace of Cups. And we're talking to the warden, and he's saying, you know, I've been thinking this thing through, and I think you guys should play first, because we're not quite sure how it's gonna work with women playing rock and roll here. So we played our set, and it was all pretty good, and the Ace of Cups got up on the thing, and they played their, by the end of their first set, there had been 2 stabbings. They stopped the concert.
Yeah, and Diane Vitalik was in that band. She played drums, and she was
Isn't
so
Diane
cute
wonderful? Yeah.
and so talented,
And
and she
Denise,
still
oh my
is.
God,
You know,
Denise-
and
Denise
Mary Ellen. You know, they were great. You know, it was a pleasure to be with them all the time. They were never, you know, there was nothing ever weird or anything.
Yeah,
you
they
know.
were really
Yeah.
excellent women. They were
Why do
really
you think they never got a record contract?
Because they were women first and foremost.
Yeah.
And management was really pretty incredibly incompetent. And they were just like us. They were just pretty crazy psychedelic girls, you know?
A lot of it was hit or miss. I mean, you know, look at Moby Grape. They could have been the American Beatles, you know, but it kind of fucked up along the way or something.
Oh, I think
you
with Moby Grape, it's just like when you have 3 of the 4 guys being bipolar.
Yeah.
You know, like this. It's pretty hard to go
Well,
through.
I remember that was unprecedented, that Capitol released every song
Yeah,
as a
right,
single.
that too.
And that was
yeah,
probably a
that
mistake.
didn't
I mean,
help. Yeah.
Phil Spector did the opposite. He wouldn't release a double-sided record because he was afraid they'd flip it over to be 2
Smart,
hits for the
yeah.
price of 1. He
But we
always had
should
an
go back
instrumental
to
on the
Ace
back.
of Cups, I think.
Or
Yeah.
Ambrose Hollingsworth, how did he fit in? Do you know Ambrose?
I knew
Yeah.
Ambrose, and I'm really not quite clear how Ambrose fit in there, other than he was like friends of those girls. You know?
Yeah.
And friends
He was the
of,
Quicksilver manager who was
Was he?
severely injured in a car crash the week after Pulte showed up on the scene to see Paul Butterfield.
oh, that's it, yeah.
And it was like, well, you need a manager now. How about
Yeah.
him? You know what Pulte was doing for a living?
Well,
He was
I-
taking acid and sitting out on the Castro Street Hill with a toolbox and repairing cars that drove up.
Wow, kind of like a Roma or something like that.
That's a
Ron's
useful
a,
skill.
Ron's a wonderful guy.
Oh,
I mean,
he's the greatest. I mean,
Yeah.
of all the San Francisco managers,
Yeah.
he was the greatest. And we know he was honest because he's poor.
yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
love Julius too. I go and see Julius once a year. I harvest. I put together a little sampler pack
Yeah.
and just take. I have the greatest respect
Yeah.
for Julius. He's,
But Ron was kind of his mentor, right? I mean,
right,
you
yeah.
know, there, yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember- I remember a benefit for Ambrose out at Muir Beach. It was one of the early acid test
Yeah.
things that happened in Muir Beach.
Well, he crippled himself in a car crash.
What
remember
about
this.
women in that whole?
Well,
Milieu.
they were the ones, you know,
How did
the
that
Ace
fit
of
in?
Cups. I mean, they
In
could
general.
still make it someday. You know, I mean, they could make it today.
Women's
you know.
liberation
Yeah.
had not
It
struck
hadn't
home as
happened yet,
consciousness in the
Yeah.
The hippie thing.
era. No.
Yeah.
You know,
But
and
let-
as
Let's
far
not
as-
forget there were your old lady,
Yeah.
there were
That's
chicks,
right, chicks,
there's all
old
this
ladies,
diminutive
and-
stuff,
Yeah.
and that was really kind of an issue in those days that, you know, hippies needed to address the fact that it was a very sexist, you know, they would always be the ones cooking
I
and.
don't think it
Making
was-
the
I don't think it was
coffee,
an issue.
making the coffee
I-
for
I
the
don't
black
It came
man.
up at all.
I don't think it was.
Well, I mean, that's where Janice and Grace, to a certain extent, kind of emerged as strong
Yeah,
women
Lydia
figures
Pence.
in that era.
Lydia's the Lydia should really get so much credit. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
There when we were at San Francisco State, and we had like, you know, it was the generation before, and like I was both playing in the Suns and playing with Lydia and Raul
Yeah.
and Rod Ellicott, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
How did Janice get along with the other girls?
She loved them. They all got along well. There was, in fact, you know, just taking it generally, like we never had a sense of rivalry with these guys. We knew they were better than we were. You know, I mean, there was no issue about right either way. I mean,
Yeah.
any
Well,
of the
I think
bands,
we just
you
all
know,
realized
the
what the other
Dead,
person
you know.
had, and I
So-
think there was a lot of mutual.
With Janice, it was the same towards Lydia. You know,
but-
they loved each other.
Right, but also with the women, there was all the sexual politics too. I mean, that
Yeah.
must have been a little
You know what,
complicated, especially with
Janice
someone like
was,
Janice, right?
Janice was such a force, you just kind of, you know,
Still, she didn't stand in the center of the stage with the band, did she?
No, not really. No,
was
she was
over
on,
on the
one
side, like
side.
where
Yeah,
Chuck
of the
should be.
drum. The drums were kind of in the middle, and then I was
well,
here,
maybe,
and she was
maybe
there.
that was some Texas stuff, leftover Texas stuff.
I don't know. They did it to Grace. They did it to Grace too.
Yeah.
Chicks didn't sing. in the
Well, that's different. The
No, it was
Jefferson
different.
Airplane.
It was different.
Yeah, you know.
It's like, working with.
She was never the lead.
It's like,
No, see what I mean? Like, that's no issue.
Well,
well, it wasn't, and,
She was
nobody
one of the
disagreed.
singers.
And it took an Albert Grossman or somebody like that to come
But
in
I
and go,
also- I
you
wanna
know
go
what
back to
time
Yeah.
it is actually.
Yeah.
Sam said something in passing there that I think
I could
was
never get
really
over that
worth
Snooki
commenting.
was in that full tilt boogie bed. I just would
Yeah.
constantly go, how did that happen?
he. Okay, we're on camera.
Some other time.
He didn't know the parts, so he became the leader of the horn section because he couldn't play the parts.
I
He's
know,
like
that's-
directing.
that's-
It's Cosmic Blues Band.
I know, that's my
Yeah.
But did you notice Sam saying to Terry, "Oh, we knew you were better"? Because the Sons of Champlin, who were a band that were widely unrecognized outside the
Yeah,
San
we all
Francisco
knew
music
that.
scene,
Yeah.
were completely recognized amongst the
Yeah,
musicians in the San Francisco music scene. They had better players. They had this incredible singer.
They
in
were
the
there
band,
first.
They had strong material. They had, they had discipline and chops. Nobody knew it outside here, but in
Yeah.
everybody was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, the Suns, they're better than us.
We
Yeah.
were from Marin
Yeah.
County, and we had a certain amount of arrogance about it. And you know what? Even though we espoused quite the egalitarian concept,
Now
I
it
think
comes out.
I think our behavior
Now-
might have been like a
now-
little less than we're part of the whole. You know?
So there was inappropriate behavior along the line?
No, no.
Elitism?
Not that. Not that. People would come to me because I was a pretty good guitar player, and people would come to me and they'd go, "You were just so aloof," and then I'd say, "Well, I was just shy," but when I
Yeah.
would think about it, no, I was really crazy and insecure, and I was really kind of full of myself because I was trying to really find that thing that was going to make
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And we were young.
Yeah.
And it wasn't
Yeah,
the best
young.
way to go
That's
about
young.
it, as far as there was some really conflict of signals being sent.
When these other bands emerged and you saw that you weren't having the commercial success, was there a time when you were really pissed off about that?
I took LSD, and I decided from that day on that I was going to be free all the time.
Have a good time all the
No,
time.
No,
And it worked.
You know
And
what?
it worked,
I
yeah.
just figured that
Yeah.
with the attitude at the time, and there was like all these concepts like living off the overflow. I mean, there was all these different ways that you could go through this society. And I thought, you could probably, personality, communication, ability to play, you could really go through this world and have a great life and not have to worry about money that much.
Yeah.
A certain amount of faith.
It did
in-
become a concern in the band's history. I remember a period of time where you guys all adopted a kind of pro forma approach to performing. You became the guitar player that sat down, and Champlin was doing all those
Yeah.
riffs about Georgia. Thank you, thank you.
I remember Robert Fripp coming up to me. Robert Fripp came up to me and he goes, "I just got to thank you." He says, "I just always hated standing up." And I saw that was it. That was it.
But I remember that was like a conscious decision. The band, Terry would be the guitarist who sat down.
That was my decision.
See, that was
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Nobody ever told me what to do with the guitar, but I was more than willing to do anything anybody ever wanted.
Yeah. And Nick Gravenitis thanks you too.
Oh, I loved it. It was so nice to see him the other day.
Yeah, he sounded good. He sounded really
I
good.
still
Nick
think
sounds better and better
Yeah, he
all
sounds
the
better,
time.
but yeah.
Still
He's
think he's
become
one
one
of
of
the
those
best.
tribal elders.
Yeah.
Like Muddy
His
or
voice
Howlin'
is
Wolf or
really good,
something.
real
He's always
quality
had one
voice.
of the best
Yeah,
voices.
yeah,
He really
yeah,
always has.
yeah.
What did the rock star thing do? I mean, when that and money, did that like?
Well, you have to ask
mess
Sam.
No,
because
that's
Sam-
later.
Sam, what happened when
Sam was
It was
so
after-
amazingly
a rock star
handsome
and
on
money?
the
Big
Rolling
Brother took
Stone.
Now, it was after, it happened after us, that came in, it was in the 70s or something.
Well, it was either you
after
Big
we
Picture
stopped.
on the Rolling Stone or Mickey Hart's. We couldn't figure
Yeah,
out
yeah.
which one was like more far out.
Yeah. But, it was kind of, all the big money happened, didn't it, in like
Well, the Airplane
1970
sort
or
of
something like
pioneered
that.
the
yeah.
kind of decadence and spending.
Yeah.
They bought
Yeah.
that house and threw
Yeah.
lavish parties and
Yeah,
drove
yeah.
crazy cars.
Did anyone
Yeah.
go to any of those lavish parties?
Oh, yeah. I was at the Belushi. The infamous one was New Year's Eve at that house where Belushi and Aykroyd, the Blues Brothers, and the Dead played New Year's Eve, and that was one of the wildest parties at Fulton Street. It was
Yeah,
off the charts.
yeah. Well,
Belushi lived up to his reputation that night.
I feel sorry for Pete Sears going through that, you know,
But
because
you know
I
what? 'Cause
love him.
there's,
Yeah.
there's the most wonderful human. Let me just say
Yeah,
to the cameras,
yeah.
there's no better human in the
It's true.
entire scene that's ever happened than Pete Sears.
And a
That
master
is-
on
Yeah.
2 instruments.
Yeah.
Great bass
If,
player,
if
great
you
keyboard.
wanted to have
Yeah.
one person represent what we wanted to do
Yeah.
when we were young
Yeah.
and idealistic, it would be Pete Sears.
When did he
And
get here?
the
He
two
played
of
with- He
you.
played with Rod Stewart.
But
he played
so
with
I
a lot
can't
of
imagine
English
him
groups.
going through that
And I want to say the
Jefferson
70s.
Starship in the
And,
80s.
You
You know,
know, and he told me a little bit about it.
Has been a serious practicing Christian all this time.
He's the most wonderful human.
Is that just astonishing to
I'm
me?
sorry to hear that.
I know, it's a
Or
little.
being Rod Stewart's musical director. I mean, he went through all kinds
Yeah,
of crazy stuff.
yeah,
with
yeah,
that, you know?
yeah, yeah.
But it comes with the territory.
I am
right?
sorry to hear that. Yeah.
You know, in some ways, it's like stranger than being a kosher Jew.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot stranger. Yeah, yeah.
Well, you know what? There's a duality, or a real duality in anything that happens inside this, because we all want money, we all want to see
These guys,
money
have they turned off the
Yeah.
camera?
and
I
we've
don't
been
know.
really
We're gonna go
moved
back
by
and
some
keep talking
really
with you, see if it's more
wonderful,
okay,
big
we're out.
ideas.
Yeah.
I thought this might be a.
And at this time,
Yeah.
You can get some fresh
I
air.
mean, I'm on everybody's side.
I thought it was
Yeah.
invited to
I,
All right, can we
because
shut
I
down?
don't have a
Bill
clue how
some
we
more.
Take a
would
break?
manage it. I'm just
Yeah,
doing what I do.
yeah, yeah.
Unplug yourself. Let's go out on the deck.
Like you
All right.
have, Terry.